All right. All right, Tom, am I supposed to say we're back?
We are back.
We're back. All right, folks, as I was saying, director, Google Cloud AI, best-selling author, speaker on AI, developer experience, user experience, Addy Osmani.
You're very kind.
Thank you for being here.
Hi, folks. It's nice to be here.
So I told you I was watching a Bloomberg piece about AI, and you were in it. And I told my wife, I was like, I know that guy. She's like, no, you don't. It's like, I do. She didn't believe me.
She didn't believe you?
No.
It was probably for the best.
Yeah. But Addy, I've known you for a long time. You've been writing and making videos and speaking since way back jQuery days.
Oh my gosh.
Doing the web.
jQuery days.
Yes. A lot of web performance stuff.
Yes.
And now, a lot of AI agents and skills.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. A lot of agents.
And today, we talked about you coming on and talking about you have a skills repo, which was on the front page of Hacker News multiple times.
I try not to look at Hacker News too much these days. You never know if it's going to be good or bad.
Well, tell us about it.
All right. So today I wanted to talk to you about agent skills. And a lot of people here probably know what they are. But very quickly, I'm Addy. I work on a bunch of agent stuff at Google. So things like the Agent Development Kit, Agent Platform, and we work on a number of skills-related projects at Google. So we've been thinking about skills for a while. If you're not really sure what skills are, they're basically a standardized way to give AI agents new capabilities and expertise. And they've been a really hot topic over the last couple of months, especially as, do you remember back in the days when people would share their secret shell config, and there'd be a lot of files, and they'd be like, hey, these are my magic tricks.
Yes, dot files.
These are my dot files that work really well for me.
My magic tricks.
This is my bag of tricks. And you'd be like, I want that bag of tricks.
Yeah.
But then you think, well, my bag of tricks might be different than your bag of tricks. And so I think of skills in a very similar way. Sometimes you want to be inspired by other people's ones. Sometimes it's okay to just copy their bag of tricks.
Right.
And so I think there's going to be some stuff in here where people can just copy and take themselves. And sometimes there are going to be things here that will be inspirational. Now, just in case skills are not something you have spent a lot of time on, I thought it'd be interesting to just give people a very quick primer. And so I vibe coded this very quick, very silly Windows desktop in a browser. And I thought that I'd drop 𝗬𝗑𝗲 in here because I haven't seen 𝗬𝗬𝗲. I haven't seen 𝗬𝗬𝗲 so much at Build.
We're not allowed to mention 𝗬𝗬𝗲.
It's a very, okay.
Yeah, it's very, well, there
Excellent.
actually is a 𝗬𝗬𝗲 suit
There
that you
is
can
a
wear,
𝗬𝗬𝗲
but if
suit.
you wear it, you're not allowed to speak. True story.
Really?
Yep. Those are the rules.
Well, you didn't mention it, I did. So,
Yeah,
so we're
there we
fine.
go.
We're totally
You broke
fine.
us into jail.
I broke you into jail.
This is weird because we have the Mac OS dock down here, but then the Windows above it. I like it.
It's bringing the best of all. This is just terrible. It's the
Quite
worst
cursed.
of all. The worst of all worlds. Okay, so if you're not really sure what skills are, basically there's a standardized way of packaging expertise and context that your agent may not necessarily have. They can package workflows, their instructions for your agent, and the structure of them is kind of this. You have a name, you have a description. There can be a lot more content in here, but basically the name and the description are the main pieces that every single skill file is going to have. And these are repeatable. Typically, you're not going to have a skill for something that's one-off, because a one-off thing is going to be more like a prompt, but a skill is something that you or your team might be using on a reusable basis, and it might be useful across a few different projects. Now, skills load on demand. So you have a task that arrives into your agent, it will match it with a skill, it will load its steps, and then it will try to follow them. It doesn't necessarily need to know more than the name and the description. So agent skills, as you mentioned, this is a project that I created a while back, and for some backstory, I had been taking a little bit slower on open source for a few years. You and I have been doing a lot of open source for a long time.
Long time.
Long time. As you know, you create an open source project, it's a lot like having a kid. You have to maintain it. And so you have to be explicit about when you want to get an open source project out into the world. And it's been a while, so I thought, okay, I will get one of these things out there. I had seen that 𝗬𝗲𝗀 had put out GStack.
That's right.
Right? And I thought, well, if 𝗬𝗲𝗀 is doing GStack and people are learning from it, there's nothing to stop me from putting my perspective on agent skills out into the world. And so I started this project. and it got some traction. And I thought, it'd be interesting to maybe walk folks through it. My perspective on agent skills is, I would say, just a little bit different to other folks. I ground my agent skills around the software development lifecycle. I think that I lean very heavily into agentic engineering, AI-assisted engineering, that side of things where you try to be very disciplined about, I'm going to be explicit about what I want built. I'm going to verify what gets built. I'm going to keep quality in mind. And so for my agent skills, I have a lot of steps that kind of map to the SDLC in here. So define, plan, build, verify, review, and ship. And for each of these different phases of the SDLC, there are a number of different skills that are inside this project that map in here. So for defining, we've got skills that can interview you to get clarity around an idea. If you have a very vague idea, so maybe you have, you've had an idea in the shower and you're like, well, I kind of know what the outcome is, but I actually don't know what the UI is going to look like, or I don't know what the details are going to be. You've got a skill here that can help refine it into something more concrete. You can do spec-driven development. We've got planning skills for turning things into tasks. We've got building skills that can help you sort of refine this to a place where you've got very, very good front-end UI, your API and interface design is in a good place. And then sort of skills for a number of these other phases for verification, that's really important. I think you and I have done a lot in the browser over time, right? I used to work on Chrome. I still build a lot of, projects that will render in the browser. And so testing in the browser automatically with an agent these days is something that I care about. So I have a skill that will do that. Automated debugging is also part of this workflow. I've got a code review loop in here too. That includes things like code simplification, security, and then I've got ship skills as well that will help you with everything from your CI to your Git workflow, your documentation, shipping, and launch. Now, there are a lot of phases in here. I'm actually going to show you how these work, but there's basically a pattern that I use for all of my skills. There's an overview. I capture when these things should be used. I have rationalizations, like why should this be used and why should this not be used, so the agent has a little bit of a guardrail that it can keep in mind. And then red flags as well, so that the agent knows if things are really going kind of off kilter. And then verification. So how do we know that we actually did the steps right and in a good job? Now, all of that stuff just maps to commands as well. So you can explicitly just use like a / command in Copilot, in any of your agentic coding tools, and trigger any of these phases. Now, you don't have to use, of course, my agent skills. As I was saying, they're a lot like your bag of magic tricks, your dot files. If there's something in here that's useful to you, copy it, steal it, have it make you productive. If you find that the way that I do things is helpful, you can go in and use it wholesale. But I wanted to just show you a little bit of this in action. So I've got a scaffolded out project here where I've installed the skills. We've got some agent files. We've got prompts for just mapping all of those skills. This is what happens when you just install it inside a project. And then we've got some of the skills themselves. And I'm over here inside sort of the Copilot sidebar. I've selected Gemini 3.5 Flash. I work at Google, I work on Gemini, so I'm going to be using Gemini 3.5 Flash here. It's a great model for agentic coding and for agent tasks. I believe that VS Code has also got like an agents view these days as well, right? So all of these commands, you can just type in /. You will see that there are additional commands populated here through using the agent skills. And you can use any of these, so like things like refine, things like the code simplification, etc. But just so that we can see what's actually getting built out, I'm going to stick with using this view. And we can start off with maybe just even doing a quick look at our skills. And I'm just going to show you test-driven development. I was talking about maybe giving you a bit of an insight into what these files contain. Now, you'll see a lot of content in here. I try to be very diligent about what ends up in context windows. So again, if you feel that there is too much that is in here for your needs, you can always trim it back, you can always optimize it further, but I try to be very explicit. So for test-driven development, I capture the TDD cycle. I have a very explicit take on what does it mean to have a failing test? What does it mean to have a passing test? How should you think about refactoring? What are other patterns that I personally think work really well? Many of these patterns are ones that have been inspired by how we build software at scale at Google. And so I thought they'd be interesting to kind of encode inside these skills. So you'll see things like the test pyramid in here, decision guides. There's a number of best practices that are encoded in here as well. Lower down, you'll also see that I capture things like test anti-patterns, things to explicitly avoid, how to approach browser testing. So this is that connective tissue that can then take us back to things like browser testing, browser debugging. I tell it what to check. I tell it how to think about security boundaries where testing is concerned. You can be as explicit or open-ended as you kind of want with these things. I try to be explicit just because I think that there's value to being intentional with how you approach these things. Now, what I thought would be interesting, I've been someone that for a lot of my life has been trying to optimize my productivity. I think I've probably failed at it a lot. And so habit tracking is something that I look at now and then, right? I think a lot of people try to improve their habits and their systems. So I thought it'd be interesting for us to try building out a habit tracker. And maybe, if you take a look at, everybody's kind of looked at their GitHub contributions graph. Maybe we have a habit tracker that uses that kind of visual to show you, like, how well are you doing at following your habits over time? So what we're going to kind of start off with here is I'm just going to trigger the refine command. And the reason I'm going to do this is I have a raw idea. So I want to build out a habit tracker, right? So we're going to say just something like a habit tracker, GitHub-inspired, and I don't really want a database backend. Maybe let's just have it all work in the browser. So store everything in the browser. That's relatively vague.
It's pretty vague.
It's pretty high level.
Are you going to say contribution graph, or are you going to leave that out?
I'm just going to keep it GitHub inspired. I could say contribution graph, but that's being explicit.
That is.
Right? So we're just going to go and trigger refine now. And so it's analyzing our prompt parameters. It's analyzing the core components of the request. It's triggering the skill. You can see that it's been reading that skill in place. Now, the first thing that's popped up here is it's asking me clarifying questions. So who is the primary target user? Great question. It doesn't know if this is just for me, or I'm building this for a team, or I'm building this for my family or my friends, or what. So the audience is going to be, let's say, a room of software engineers at Build, right? Or YouTube, because people are going to be watching this later.
So just anyone.
Just anybody. What are the constraints and expectations for browser-only storage? Great question. You could be using IndexedDB, local storage, session storage, lots of different options. I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm OK with local storage for this. Beyond the standard contribution grid, so here, it was able to figure that out itself. What GitHub analogies do you want to explore, like committing, a habit, branching, variations, pull requests? I don't want to go too deep into these analogies.
Yeah, I was about to say.
I think let's keep it simple with the contribution grid.
Interesting that it's leaning into that. It's
Yeah.
like it wants to make the whole
Yeah.
thing about GitHub.
And this is one of those things, if you take a look at how that skill is defined, it actually has language around trying to begin converging on the direction, the idea that you have, leaning into like, okay, well, I kind of get what you're going for. Let's keep going down that path. So what does success look like for the MVP? Because very often, if you define like just a high-level prompt, it doesn't know if you're trying to build out something for a startup or a side project at the weekend or what. So I feel like the performance requirements are good. Like all of this stuff seems good. I don't necessarily need it to be offline first with service workers just yet. So load fast, clean UI. That's about it. Load fast and have a clean UI. Be responsive. OK, so we've got all of these answers now. Didn't take us very long just to start getting clarity around this, right? I didn't have to go writing a big spec myself or anything like that just yet. And so it's trying to read the rest of my project yet just now, trying to see if there's any other context in there. This is a fresh project, so there's not a whole lot that it needs. And here's the output, right? It has a problem statement. It has statements around like how we differentiate directions, think about stress tests, and it gives us a few directions we can take. So direction A is a dev profile configurator. So a very minimalist, high-fidelity clone of a GitHub profile that allows us to track habits the same way that you would GitHub repositories. There's a lot more detail in here. Direction B is more of a keyboard-driven habit terminal. I'm more of a...
TUIs are so hot right now. Yeah.
TUIs are so hot. Direction C is a markdown SVG exporter, so a plain text backend tool. Your habit configuration and grid data are represented. So this is more data. This is more like you really want to enter in raw data and manage that, which is not really the vibe I was going for. I think that the first one's probably the closest to what I had in mind. So I'm going to go with direction A. And you can also see that it's got other assumptions in here and pushbacks. So it's asking me which direction resonates the most. I'm just going to say direction A.
Did it recommend one? I couldn't see under the counter there.
So we can scroll back. Once you pick A, B, or C, I will produce one. It didn't recommend one. You can actually change your skill files to say, well, I want you to provide your own perspective on it.
Okay.
In this case, I'm trying to,
because I notice models like to recommend.
Yeah,
they almost always, when they give you choices, be like, well, this is what I do.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, if that's what you do, then that's what I want to do.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes I will ask the model, like, give me 3 choices and tell me what you think I should do, just in case.
Yes, but then I feel like I'm just always doing what the model wants. You know what I mean? I'm like, well, if you think it's best, then it's probably best, which is not true
I have
at all.
so much to say about cognitive debt and cognitive surrender.
That's right. Your next article on the front page of Hacker News.
So what we have here, so the app is called Streak. We have a problem statement. We've got a direction here. We've got some assumptions to validate, like what is the retention rate? What is like the frequency going to be around habits? What's the mobile usability going to be? So since engineer configure setups on desktops, but often complete habits on mobile, is local storage enough? Well, probably, yeah. Local storage is well supported everywhere at this point. So I think that pretty much all of these ideas are cool. So we have our MVP scope defined for us here. And it also says what it's not doing. So it's not doing cloud sync. It's not going to be doing advanced social features. And it's got some open questions for us if we want to provide clarity around that. And it also asks us, do we want to just save it? So I'm going to say yes, save it. So we've now taken a very high-level idea, and we've refined it. Now, the next phase of this is actually turning this high-level idea. So we've gotten it into a better place. Let's turn this into a more detailed spec.
Yep.
Now, for some folks, you might say, well, it feels like it's a few steps. You don't have to follow my way of doing things. If you want to just have like one step for creating your spec, you can do that. I just happen to like specificity.
So you like to plan, you want the plan, the spec, and then the implementation.
Yes,
okay.
yes, exactly.
I'm a plan implement guy myself.
Yeah.
I just skip over.
Yeah, that's totally okay. Everybody's got their own workflow. Here you can see the file that it's generated. And this is going to be a starting point and entry for the next step. So the next step is going to be spec. So we've got our idea. We can go and just type in /spec. And it's then going to read in the output from that last phase. And it's going to start being able to generate something that's much more concrete. So it's taking in those assumptions, is defining success criteria, scaffolding out the tech stack a lot more in detail, and then it's got those open questions in a little bit more detail
and that is really snappy.
Yeah, it's pretty quick.
That model is quick.
Use Gemini 3.5 Flash. Or whatever model is out at the time you're watching this on YouTube.
Yeah, because
AI moves fast,
24 hours, everything will be different.
Everything will be different. So we've got some open questions. Grid generation technique. Should we use a standard GitHub contribution grid? Do we prefer rendering grids as modular dynamic SVG group structure or CSS grid element layouts? I'm going to be honest, I know CSS grid. I use SVG, but I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to, for one, I'm going to say, choose what you think is best. And then first visit boilerplate, what default habits should we set up for new visitors? It's a good question.
Oh, like bad habits, or are we tracking bad habits or good habits?
We're tracking good habits.
Okay.
What are good habits we should?
Good habits: exercise, hydration, reading.
Reading, meditation. Do people meditate?
Doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling. Okay.
Meditation probably better than doom
meditation
scrolling.
after you're doom scrolling. Okay. Do you have a desired location for this file? I'm just going to let it do what you think is best. Cool. What I love about this is all of this UI, all of these questions are directly inside of the Copilot sidebar. I don't have to use some other app for it. Whatever your agentic UI surface is, you can just have a similar experience there. So it's now created a spec for us. I'm going to keep this. And the next phase, you can go and you can take a look at the spec, by the way. It's over here. It's going to be a much more detailed version of that original file that we had. But you'll see that we have success criteria. We've got metrics in place here for performance, so things like largest contentful paint. We've got a tech stack that's defined. This is going to be very simplistic. So vanilla JavaScript, I didn't say I wanted something in React. I'm okay with
never
vanilla.
asked you about the tech stack, did it?
Yeah, it didn't ask me about the tech stack. And that's another thing that you can encode inside of your skills.
So this is an assumption that you just let it go with?
This is an assumption that I'm okay with. You can assume like it's defined 𝗦𝗽𝗲 and Playwright for our end-to-end testing, which I'm okay with, our storage, and then project structure and code style. And if there's anything in here that you don't like, you can always go back and either manually tweak it or work with your agent to configure this more. So you've got your spec now. The next thing that you might want to do is actually start breaking this down into individual pieces. Now this is useful if you've got a large project that you're working on. If you're working on something small, you probably just want to go straight into implementation.
Yeah.
But I'm going to show you this plan in action anyway. So we've got a plan step here. And what we can do with plan is, I can go and I can run plan. I'm just going to show you this working. And what this can do is help break down, what we say in software engineering often is if you've got a big problem, break it down into smaller pieces, right? And plan kind of helps you with that. It breaks your big spec down into granular chunks that can then be implemented. And that's really good if you're working with TDD because you've got very individual pieces that can be tested, verified as you move on to other pieces. People have lots of different ways that they like doing TDD, so I'm not going to assume that my way is the right way or anything like that. So it's going and it's scaffolding out the basic parts of the project right now because that's fine. Like it can set up our boilerplate before we actually go and start implementing the rest. I'm just going to do keep on that. And you'll see that it's asking, before beginning phase 1, I should initialize our structured to-do list to provide full transparency, and it's going to do that now. So what you're going to have here is the package.json file, which we see has been created. The implementation plan is established and saved to plan. So we've got a task list here. You see phases and tasks. So we've got phase 1, task 1, which has its acceptance criteria. And this is like build the pure logic TypeScript interfaces, your types, your functions to compute the streaks, your total contributions within the last 365 days, the local storage pieces, basically stuff that doesn't necessarily touch your UI. And we've got some acceptance criteria here as well. So we've got a list of things that have to be true, as well as verification. So the test suite has to be able to run on that piece of logic in order to move forward. It also suggests what files are probably going to be touched as a part of this, just to really hone them down. If you've been doing any vibe coding or agentic engineering for a while, you know that one of the ways in which we try to limit our blast radius is by saying, well, I'm just going to target these specific files. Because especially if you're working on an existing project, you don't want it to start overwriting or touching files that maybe have nothing to do with the task at hand.
Yeah.
Right? So we have a few different phases and tasks here. Some of the other phases will include our data storage, so that layer for local storage. It'll include sort of the visualization of our habits as that GitHub-style contribution graph, as well as the rest of our UI. So we've got our plan here. What you can do, again, this supports being very granular or not having to think about that in as much detail. So if I wanted, I could do something like /build task 1 and just have it do the first task on that list. So let's see what it does. It's created 4 to-dos as a part of that. It's evaluating it. It's reading our test-driven development skill right now. You can see that it's installing those first things. I'm also just going to do
if you go,
always allow.
You can do it down to the very bottom and turn on bypass approvals if you want to.
I'm learning something new. Oh, wait. I see what you're talking about here.
Right there, yeah. And then we'll stop asking. Are you a bypass approvals? You recommend bypassing approvals?
I bypass approvals on all my personal projects.
So now you're building one phase at a time. Is this generally how you work, or are you more?
I think it really depends on what you're building.
Okay.
So if I am building a personal side project and I just want to build something maybe it has one purpose, I'm probably going to skip building out one phase at a time this way and just have it build the entire thing. If I'm building something relatively complex, I'm okay doing it a phase at a time. It might feel like it's slower, but the fact that you go through all of these steps and you know, well, this slice is tested, as we build out the UI, I know nothing else is broken.
Yeah.
I've now done our data layer, nothing else is broken. This gives you a lot more confidence as you're working through. It's just a different way of approaching this.
It's such a trade-off though, because then the human's back in the loop. Like once again, you're the problem.
Yep.
You're slowing the agent down.
Yep.
It's tough. I struggle with this myself.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say that you have to make a judgment call at the end of the day about how much time you want to invest and where in the software development lifecycle you want to invest it. Do you want to put a lot of time into your spec? Just have your agent build out a lot of code and then spend time reviewing it, defining your tests at that point, figuring out like how do I evaluate quality? Like that can be okay as well. Or do you want to approach it with TDD in mind? Do you want to have like an explicit strategy around how you're going to verify quality so that as you're going through, it's already addressing these things? And I don't think there's a right or wrong way, it's just different ways of working.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So what you can see with this first phase is that the implementation is test-driven. We have our first target failing red test to tell us that, okay, we have a test, it's failing. We're going to implement the minimal clean logic in streaks.
So we're red-green here, yes?
Yeah,
okay.
yes. And as I said, you don't have to do this with like individual tasks. We can just keep running build to work through the rest of this. And then we can get on to other phases. So you can see that it is, thanks to Burke's tip around bypassing approvals, we're just going to keep running through this. And I'm a person that people will often talk about, how do you as an engineer understand what is getting generated if you're not reading all of the code?
Yeah.
Very often as your agent is generating stuff, what are you doing? Are you switching over to another agentic task? Like very often, I found myself doing that. And so I started to slow down a little bit. And these days I try to read the trajectory a little bit more. Like, what did it say? What was it thinking? Why was it thinking the way it was thinking? And is there any nugget of information in there that I can extract that just lets me know, oh, okay, well, that was the way I was expecting, or it wasn't.
I see what you mean.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I don't know what everybody else does, but I watch the agent work. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not reading everything that it's doing. I'm mostly just staring at it.
Yep.
When I should be doing something else. But I'm literally watching agents spin. But I'm curious, are you looking at the code?
Great question. So I generally, unless it's a personal project, because a lot of personal projects end up being throwaway things.
Yeah.
Oh, I have this need for an hour. I'm just going to build something and throw it away. And in those situations, I'm very okay with saying, if I don't understand the code, the agent is going to go fix something for me. However, if it's going to be something I'm going to maintain for at least a few weeks or a few months, I generally go back and at least understand the architecture, and I try to read through some of the core files so that if I discover that the agent wasn't able to fix something or it goes off on a tangent, I am able to go back in and make fixes myself.
Yeah.
Very often, so I'm going to keep working through build and we can keep chatting.
Yeah.
So it's going to keep doing its TDD phases. As each slice gets implemented, it's going to go from red to green, implement the phase, and get everything done.
This is so interesting. I didn't even know about red-green testing until SpecKit came out. It was the first time I'd ever seen that. That's the idea of writing failing tests and then making them work. And I was like 45 years old. It's kind of sad.
You do not look over 45 at all.
I'm not, yeah.
Yeah. Or 45.
It was yesterday.
It was yesterday.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much.
So we're going to keep doing this. I also wanted to share a comment on this. I think that very often in the entire sort of agentic engineering diaspora, the industry paints very broad strokes about best practices. Like if you're on Twitter, if you're on any social network, very often the best practices for a solo founder or a small startup team will be shared. And the best practices for that kind of team that maybe don't have users yet, maybe they're working on an evergreen code base, those are very different to people who are working on something either legacy, brownfield, with a team. And so I think that it's important just to understand that there are situations where it's okay to just give in to the vibes and have the agent figure things out. And if something goes wrong, we'll just have the agent fix it. In other situations where actually understanding what's happening behind the scenes is still quite important.
Yeah, 100% agree. I actually, so what's super interesting about this is that I think myself and most people are looking for just tell me what to install that's going to make everything work, right? Is it agent skills? Is it superpowers? Is it GStack? Like, what is it? And the answer is, it might be some of any of those things, but your job is less about writing code now and more about building these workflows that actually work. And it's not always the same even for different projects within the same organization. Yeah, so
absolutely.
It's a very, I don't know what to call it. It's not software engineering. It's not automation. It's, like, how would you even describe this? It's like we all work at McKinsey now.
I don't know. I acknowledge that agentic engineering, we're now working on a spectrum, right? And there are going to be times when we're vibe coding, there's going to be times when we're agentic engineering, and the more diligence you have to apply to the process, the closer you are getting to agentic engineering. And I think that at big companies, small companies, anytime that you're working on something that exists and has existing users, you owe it to them to care about quality, to care about not breaking things in ways that sometimes agents subtly do.
Yeah, 100% agree. If you're building a habit tracker, that's one thing. If you're shipping VS Code, you have to be pretty meticulous about not breaking that.
Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes left here.
So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit and just show you very quickly some of these other phases. So the agent skills package also includes a verify step. Now what verify does is it's able to just check that the implementation as it has been done so far, whether it's complete or whether we've partially implemented something that can actually be used just yet, can run in a browser and actually do what it needs to do. So it's going to go and check that it's actually able to spin something up. Let's see if enough of it has been built that it's able to do that. So it's doing its npm run build right now. It's going to spin up its npm run dev. And we'll see if this actually works. So we have something that looks like a GitHub profile.
Where did you pull that picture from?
I have no idea.
Who is that?
The magic of LLMs.
That's someone, if that person's watching the stream now going,
someone in the world.
Hey.
Hello, whoever this is. This could be like a non-developer as well. This could be a person that just likes to bake cookies somewhere in the world.
It just happens to be on GitHub?
Yeah, it just happens to be on GitHub. But it's opened up this browser directly inside of VS Code. It's able to run its checks behind the scenes to see, okay, well, is anything actually broken? If I interact with UI, does anything actually begin to break? And I think that this is very interesting. Like if you actually go to the prompts and you go to our verify skill, it will end up trying out the browser testing with DevTools skill. There are many ways to do sort of automated browser testing these days, whether you're using Puppeteer, Playwright, the Vercel agent browsers. There's a lot of different options. I'm not going to say there's a right one, but choose what makes sense to you. I just think there's a lot of really great tools these days for just making sure that your thing basically works. Whether you decide to kind of encode all of your user journeys and test them out very, very holistically is kind of up to you at the end of the day.
Yeah, web devs, as usual, have it better than anybody else, right? Like, it's so much harder to do with native apps.
Now, for my skills, the review phase ends up being really important, and people have a lot of opinions about review. I tend to find, and this is something that I found talking to engineers at Google as well, we still have a culture where we tend to have engineers manually review code. Even with that, even with trying to bring AI into our code review process, having an agent do a local first pass or multi-pass is really, really valuable. Now, there are some people that will take this all the way to adversarial code review with very deep patterns. There are people who will have other models, like, hey, maybe I'm gonna use Gemini for the implementation and Opus or Codex for other. So you have a lot of flexibility here. There is, again, no right or wrong way. People will often decide these things based on vibes. But what you'll see is we have a number of different kinds of review checks that were done here. So what's working well? What's technically considered correctness? So all of the unit tests that were implemented so far appear to be, passing. We have no security issues, it seems. We're working with vanilla JavaScript. We of course want to avoid XSS issues or cross-site scripting, anything like that. Readability and architecture seems to be in a good place. Performance seems to be in a good place. This is a simple, application, and it also applies some recommendations. So keyboard navigations for that contribution graph makes sense, right?
Yeah.
That's not something that I had considered, and you might find that depending on the complexity of what you're working on, that you can have this be much more elaborate. Another part of code review that I find useful these days is code simplification. Now, very often what we'll do is we'll have an agent implement something, we'll verify, maybe you'll read the code, maybe you'll verify that, hey, it at least runs in the browser, or if you're building a native app, hey, it at least runs. But you don't necessarily go back and ask yourself, hey, could this actually be simpler? And one of the wonderful things about TDD or having tests or quality gates around is that you can now go and do that code simplification loop and have something that can verify the rest of your logic still works.
Yeah,
right?
Very interesting. So a question on the security one.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you trust the non-deterministic? Because to me, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? The rest of this stuff you can deal with. The security stuff cannot. How much do you trust that review that you're not pushing a key, you're not pushing some SQL injection, something that's just going to get you in a ton of trouble down the road?
Oh, yeah. I think that there are a lot of good open source and commercial offerings that go even deeper into security than these skills do. And so there are a lot of things that, we've seen, anybody that's been doing vibe coding and genetic engineering for a while has run into these issues, right? Very often people will be using API keys in horrendous ways, right? They will be quickly putting together something and not realize that, oh, hey, wait, there are actually tons of data leakage issues, or the way that auth is implemented is leaving you exposed to all kinds of problems.
Right, or somebody can just nail your API over and over again because it's not locked down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're a senior engineer, if you're experienced, you know what to look out for. If you're intermediate, if you're not quite as technical, if you're coming at this without as much of that background, or maybe you are an experienced engineer and you're just lazy, because sometimes we are lazy, it's useful to encode those things in skills just as a sanity check for yourself.
Oh, actually list specifically?
Yeah.
So I find that I cannot think of all the edge cases, but models are actually really, really good at this. If you ever ask a model to review a code base, it will almost always find something that you need to change or improve.
Yeah.
Right? They're really, really meticulous and good at that. So, yeah, again, I don't know. I feel like we need maybe better products or whatever it is, but all of this, to me, agentic code should go through some deterministic gate that's yes, security sign-off has been achieved, because I don't trust, I'm scared to death to push anything live on Twitter and be like, here's what I built, and then have somebody be like, oh, and here's your Gemini key.
And I think that's where there is a lot of value in understanding what does good mean, what does done mean, right? And if you care about security, you care about quality, you care about performance, you care about accessibility, you care about any of these things, that's a good reminder to try encoding those into how you approach quality gates in your projects.
Yeah.
Skills are just one way of encoding that into how you think about all this stuff. But I think that just having tooling in place to make sure that you're not merging in code that's going against those best practices is always a good idea.
Yeah, I feel like we need more of these deterministic gates. I just don't know what they are. Right now, Markdown is the solution to everything. It's well, we have non-determinism. How are we going to fix that? With more non-determinism.
With text files.
With text files. So we're at about 6 minutes here. I'd like to do some Q&A. If we could, you can continue building.
So I'll wrap this up in a minute. So there are a lot of great teams, labs who've been thinking about code simplification. And very often what I love to do is anytime that they open source their work or they write up a blog post about their work, I go and study, is there something that I can learn from what they're doing that I can then incorporate into my skills or how I work? You can do that for code simplification as well. Even for this simple app, it's already found 3 or 4 opportunities to simplify the code. So that's great. We've got a ship step in here as well. Just for time, I'm just going to skip ahead and show you one that I built earlier. This is called Streak. It's got a GitHub contribution graph style, graph at the very bottom. And it just shows us over time, are you actually following some of these best practices? So for me, am I going screen free for some portion of the morning? Am I, getting my workday goals planned? Am I reflecting? So you can, this is not a complicated app, but you can pop open, your browser dev tools. You can go into the application panel, local storage, and we can see that all of our data is kind of here. We've got all of our entries for each of these things. It's all local. It all works. Like all of this will work offline, but it does the trick. Now, we can do Q&A.
You want to do Q&A?
Yeah,
Let's
we can
some
do Q&A.
So let's spend a few minutes. Do we have a, Tom, how do we do this? Do we have a mic, or if we're going to do Q&A? Oh, right there. Yeah, so if you do, we'll continue building here. If you want to ask questions, now is your chance to do so. In the meantime, we can continue building or chatting about skills if you want to. It's up to you.
Awesome. If folks have questions, I'm happy to take it. Otherwise, I'm happy to keep showing you stuff.
All right, we got one. It's Anthony.
Hey, yeah, question for you. How would you split up the work between like a Flash type model and a Pro model? Would you plan in Flash and then implement in Pro? How would you split the work?
Did you hear that?
Yeah, interesting question. So how do you split up between models? Like, do you plan in Flash and then implement in Pro? Like, are you multi-model between the Gemini family? Like, what's your personal take here?
Yeah, that's exactly my workflow. I tend to, and especially if you're trying to optimize for cost, that's a great way to go about it. You can use a lower cost model often for the planning phase, especially if you're trying to optimize for tokens. Use a lower cost model for the planning phase, use a much more capable model for your implementation. And whether that's going to be one of the Gemini Pro models or Opus or Codex, any of those options can be good for your needs. But I found that flexibility works well. And Copilot and many other tools also let you just easily switch between different models for these needs and these different phases,
yeah.
which is great.
Interesting. I have a question for you. Where does MCP factor into this workflow?
That's a great question. I have too many strong opinions on MCP these days. I think that
let's do it. we actually have some extra time, so we can go over a little bit.
Right. I personally think that things have been moving so fast, right? And earlier on, we would talk about the difference in, hey, MCP was really good for, the connectivity, right, between data and agents and so on. And I think that people found that very often there are cases where you actually want a CLI instead of an MCP. And we've started to see workflows begin to evolve a little bit more because maybe you don't need to have so many tools exposed. Maybe just directly using a CLI is going to be a more efficient way to achieve your goals. So I personally feel like we're still in that kind of evolution phase of seeing okay, well, where is MCP going to be the best fit versus just having people directly use the CLIs for things?
This is kind of a contentious area, I feel like. Because at one point I did say your MCP server should probably be a skill and a CLI.
Yeah.
I kind of still stand by that just because AIs are so good at using CLIs.
Yeah.
The only rejoinder I have to that, I was chatting with Reese, who I think is over at OpenCode now, about this on X, and he pointed out that the authentication is a real problem, and that MCP does this really, really well. And with CLIs, it's really hard to control auth and permissions for your agent. So I agree with it, but generally speaking, I almost use entirely skills. The only MCPs I use is, of course, WorkIQ, right? Because if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem, that's the best thing ever. And then Context 7. I always talk about
Context 7 is great.
It's amazing.
It's so good.
If y'all aren't using the Context 7 MCP server, that's the one thing you should install today, and just tell your agent, always read the docs before you do anything, and it will use Context 7 to read the documentation. It's brilliant.
I love that, even in Google Cloud, I know in lots of other places, people have started to release and maintain more skill packs just because you can get so far these days with making sure that regardless of what cutoff date your agent's data is going to be, you've got up-to-date documentation, up-to-date instructions about where to go, where to find things, exactly what the developer workflow should be. So I'm a huge fan of skills. People don't know that by yet.
Yeah, they're amazing. And the other advantage, you talked about this early on, is that they're loaded progressively, right? So one of the things we're all struggling with right now is that the context window is a problem. And honestly, I feel like we need a better solution than a context window in general at some point in the future. This is a really rudimentary primitive for interacting with LLMs. But the problem is that the context window fills up really fast, and MCP has to specify all the tools. So if you didn't know, skills are progressively loaded. So what the model gets is like the skill name and a brief description, and then from that, it then will load in the skill, and then the skill may point to other files, and then it will load in those files. And so it's just really, really economical for token usage, which is more important now. It's becoming more important every day as we are moving from a world of use as much AI as you want to this is how many tokens you have, use them wisely.
Absolutely.
All right, well, Addy, thank you so very, very much for being here. I learned a ton. I was looking forward to it just for the free training on your skills repo, so I got something out of it. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
It's great.
All right. Thank you so much. So we will be right back with our next guest, and I guess maybe folks can come chat with you if they want to.
Sure thing.
All right.
Thanks, folks.
There we go.